In a world with artificial intelligence, how do we transform education? Thanks for tuning in. I'm Daniel Lopez, and this is the AI Education Conversation, where we explore the opportunities, risks, and impacts of AI across education. If you'd like to join the conversation, check out the AIeducationconversation.com. Let's jump in. Welcome, everyone. Hope the first couple of weeks of school are going well. Today's episode will feel a little bit different than other conversations we've had thus far. As a part of my journey leading the AI education conversation, I sometimes have the opportunity to coach folks in organizations who are looking to explore or adopt AI in different ways. My client today graciously allowed me to share our conversation as he works towards bringing artificial intelligence to his school this year. If you are a listener who's grappling with the same situation as Emmett, I hope our conversation is helpful. I'd also love to hear from you at the end of my coaching call with Emmett. Would you like for me to share more of these types of conversations? What stood out or resonated for you? What did we miss? If you want to continue supporting the podcast, a rating, a review, share on social media, recommendation to a colleague, all go a long way in helping to amplify our space so we can host bigger conversations. They're all free of charge. If your school, district, or organization is ready to explore AI and make a change, I am available for workshops and coaching at the AIeducationconversation.com. Humans at the heart of education. Enjoy the episode.
Oh yeah, my name is Emmett, and I just finished up my first year teaching high school biology and environmental science. I teach at a large urban public school with around 1,800 students, and my school has a very large English language learner population. The school I teach at is also below state standards in math, science, and English language arts. And to try to remedy these issues, our school district is going through a multi-year improvement plan, and we're trying to improve the community aspect of our school, hoping that the downstream effects of that will help other problems such as attendance and dropout rates.
I know that obviously you and I, our paths were connected because of the opportunity with artificial intelligence. I'm wondering why here, why now? Why is this something that's important for your school district, and why does it feel like it needs to happen right now?
Great question. So earlier this year, I'd always had a keen interest in AI. And ever since GPT was released in 2022 to the public, I've been playing around with it and kind of watching how this landscape of artificial intelligence has evolved and how it is permeating all sorts of different industries. So naturally, when I went into teaching, I had an eye towards, all right, what is going to be the relationship between my teaching practice in AI and then my students learning in AI? And I very quickly realized that kind of the whole education, AI and education landscape was a little bit of a chaotic and a little bit of a mess. Some teachers used various different AI tools, whether it was GPT itself or maybe Claude or Perplexity. Other teachers used more the second gen AI tools like Magic School, Diffit, Eduade, and their teaching practices, but there was no coherent structure. And there was a lot of inefficiency in the way teachers both used AI if they did use it, and also inefficiencies that could be remedied if other teachers were introduced to AI. So I saw a lot of opportunity for my colleague to really have a better understanding of what could be done with AI tools, right? What kind of work can be offloaded to an AI? What opportunities does an AI present for improving teaching practices? How can a teacher leverage AI to help their students, to help their lesson planning, et cetera? And then from a student perspective, I saw AI being used both inappropriately by students and also appropriately by students. So to give an example, on any given day, students would be using AI both to replace their work product and try to avoid engaging fully in a lesson, but also some students would use AI as more of a thought partner and to engage deeper in whatever the content of the day was. So that really kind of demonstrated to me that we have all this opportunity for upside. And there's also the other side of the same coin is we have this opportunity for students to kind of skirt the rules and avoid really diving into the where the lesson plan was. So my thought was, okay, we have all these pros and cons, and we have no structure. If this school district had a structure for both, or a framework for both teachers and students, I think we could really make a lot of progress in making sure that AI has a very positive impact on everybody.
Got it. So just to make sure that I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like your primary objective, your North Star here would be to establish a framework for stakeholders within your broader school district to be operating from to really understand to what extent artificial intelligence should be used and how it should be used within our school district community. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah. So I think for teachers, it's more of a, what opportunity does AI present itself, right? What can I do with AI to improve my teaching practice? And then for students, I think even something as rudimentary as, what is an LLM? How does it work? Right. And then from there, you can go into, okay, when is it appropriate for me to use an AI tool? Right. And when is it not? Right? Something as simple as just a foundational understanding of what this technology is and how it can impact our life in the educational setting.
So, in addition to a framework, what I think I heard you say is, and you provided good examples across what this would look like for adults and with students, is AI literacy. There needs to be an AI
Mhm,
literacy component for teachers and for students. And under within that literacy, it's like, what is AI? What are those things? And then also like
mhm.
how should you use it? The opportunities there. Is that kind of cover, I think, some of your objectives for this?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep.
So if that's the case, then and we agree to that, I think the first thing I'm curious about is to just probe a little bit further on some of the things you initially shared. So, and I think this is important for understanding what the especially what the AI literacy component looks like. I think it may also inform what the framework looks like, but especially for determining what are some of the scope and sequence, if you will, for our AI literacy in your school community here. So the first thing I heard you say back a little while ago is you actually said that there's quite a few teachers in your school community using AI tools, and you said something along the lines of there's folks using different like top line LLMs like Claude, ChatGPT, but then you said there are some teachers that are even using those secondary tools like Magic School, Diffit, etc. So would you actually say that your anecdotal perspective here is that there are quite a few teachers who have at least a little bit of context on what AI is and or are actually using some of these tools?
Definitely. I think that at the very least, most teachers know that these tools exist, right? I would say that the amount of teachers that use these tools on a weekly basis is probably no larger than 10%. And the ones that use it on a daily basis is even lower, maybe only one or two teachers. And I think that comes from a place of not knowing how to use these tools to their maximum capacity in an efficient manner. So a lot of times, if you aren't using these tools with a really robust understanding of how they work and how to use them effectively, teachers actually can create more time for themselves. So I think a lot of teachers kind of tried these tools, didn't really have a lot of have a lot of background knowledge in how to use them, and then mess around with them, saw that it created more work for them, and then didn't return it to them. If that makes sense. So I think that that answer your question.
Yeah. I think my intention there is to really understand what the water's like, right, in your school
Yeah.
community as it relates there. What I think I heard you say is that there might already be some conceptions about what artificial intelligence is. And it sounds like a lot of folks may have conceptions based on actually firsthand experience, which is a little bit
Mhm,
unique even in 2024. A lot of times when in my experience, when folks do have perceptions, especially in school communities, a lot of times that may even come from secondhand experiences, right? From media, not
mhm,
necessarily even from that. So if you actually do have quite a few teachers who have already interacted with those tools, albeit maybe did not walk away from those experiences super impressed or feeling like it was something
mhm,
that they're baking into the daily routine. I think
mhm,
that is potentially an opportunity. That's something to bake off of that
mhm.
could be leveraged there. The fact that folks do have some prior context. So I think it means the way that you approach some of the AI literacy might then be able to be informed by that if that is actually the
Mhm,
case. So
mhm,
and then the other piece I heard you say obviously is that what your teaching community may be up against is that folks do have an understanding of these tools. They are able to like roughly define what a generative AI tool does, but not really having a bunch of use cases or a clear understanding of how the application of those tools into their daily work stream is going to make
Mhm.
their life easier or more efficient
Yeah.
in that way. And whatever, however we define that, whatever that means.
Yes, exactly.
The so maybe to just take like a hard pivot for a second on something else you said,
Mhm.
just to make sure I'm understanding these things correctly, is you also on the teacher on the student side, excuse me, you started to say that students are using AI inappropriately or using it appropriately, but I noticed that your example for how you define that was really grounded in work. It was grounded in how
Mhm.
students are using it appropriately or inappropriately
Mhm.
for the context of completing or not completing student work. So would you
Mhm.
say that to the extent that students are using AI appropriately or inappropriately, it's about that, right? It's truly just about them not understanding how to use it, or they're not using it effectively for assignments, for work.
Correct. Yeah, I think a lot of it comes from, as you mentioned, a desire to avoid really doing the work themselves, or it can come from not fully understanding the work itself and then using AI, as I mentioned, as that thought partner to try to get a better understanding of how to approach work or how to collect more background information on the work at hand.
That gives me some clarity. The reason I asked that too is because in the context of the student experience, especially when it comes to AI literacy, there's other lenses that can sometimes be very important, right? One of the as an
Mhm.
example, two of the other lenses that I've oftentimes seen can be really important to have conversations with students about. Well, I would say actually three. Number one is, as you described earlier, uh, what is AI and how do these tools work? So giving some basic context in that, right?
Mhm.
The second is deepfakes, being able to
Mhm.
actually teach students like some of the things to look out
Mhm.
for if you are navigating social media or
Mhm.
you're seeing pictures on the internet more broadly, and making sure that you're not drawing assumptions based on one picture that you see, because we now live in a world where a lot of those could actually be falsely generated images. I
Mhm.
didn't really hear that coming up as much. It doesn't mean obviously that you can't address it, but I'm just saying I didn't hear
Mhm.
that in what you're saying the problem is with your students. And then I think finally the other layer beyond the one that you mentioned, which I think can especially be important for students, is relationships with artificial intelligence,
Mhm.
because oftentimes and currently there's actually a lot of chatbots that are made to be highly persuasive and engaging. And
Mhm.
especially for our young people, if they're engaging with some of these bots, I think it is important to start to have conversations and understand, like, hey, this isn't a person. It doesn't have feelings. When you're
Mhm.
talking with this, just make sure that you understand. Don't you should or part of maybe the conversation also is like to what extent your school district and your school
Mhm.
community like has a perspective on this. The challenge I think, especially for this last question, is there's not really any, I think, robust guidance that I've seen to really answer that
Mhm.
question. But the reality is some of these tools are intended to be
Mhm.
tools that are captivating and engaging for students, right? And so our ability to
Yep.
be able to set guardrails around that usage for students is also something that could be really important in any AI literacy proposition. And then finally, the last one you already said, which is to what extent can we
Mhm.
use AI to complete authentic student work? And what does that actually look
Yeah.
like? And that one is thankfully is pretty easy in the sense that there's actually a lot of great scales that folks have developed,
Mhm.
which you could probably adopt readily or directly or tinker within your school district context to use. But there's a lot of great experts out there who have already developed scales that you might be able to
Yeah.
leverage or use in your thinking. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to reflect that back onto you so that you understood how I was thinking about it, because I don't think I made that entirely clear in the beginning.
No, that's definitely great. And I think I was too narrow in my scope. That one thing you mentioned about deepfakes is definitely something that I'm interested in to see a lot. Just because as a science teacher, I have students come up to me all the time and been, Mister, look at this picture. Isn't this crazy? Look at this article. Can you believe this is real? And I look at it and it's not real, right? It's an AI deepfake. It's an AI generated article or faux research paper that was made up using AI. And I saw that my students really don't have the tools necessary to be able to discern what is real information versus what is AI generated information. And so I think this comes in with the AI literacy pieces. How can we teach these students? Because as they go in to become citizens of the world, like, it's going to be a vital skill is what information is reputable and is trustworthy and what's fake. Right. So I definitely see a huge piece of that in my teaching practice as well.
Got it. Okay. So yeah, so then maybe as we define the objective here around AI literacy, when we think about students, maybe we're expanding it to ensure that deepfakes is addressed in some type of way in those
Mhm,
conversations. Okay. So when you think about what your school district is currently doing, and that could be that's a very loose
mhm,
definition. It doesn't necessarily mean policies enacted, written, and all that thing. It could also
mhm,
mean ABC people are thinking about it or talking to this or going to this conference.
mhm,
What are you aware of? Who is doing what in your school community related to
mhm.
thinking, exploring artificial intelligence?
Yeah. So at the end of this past year, I kind of did a big push trying to see what was in development, what people were thinking about, kind of how, if and how any frameworks were being developed. And I talked to various people in the administration, and every time I kind of talked to them about AI, developing some kind of framework, putting forth some of the problems and things I've been talking about so far, the response that I usually got was, yeah, that's definitely a problem. We should do something about it. And then kind of crickets chirping. So it was very much of, I do really think that our administration sees this as a problem and wants to do something for it, but no one is willing to take that proactive step. And so maybe I've been keeping in touch with some people over the summer, and it doesn't sound like any headway is being made in the AI front. So I think as of right now, I think we have people that are open to some sort of development of some sort of framework, some sort of guidelines, but nobody's moving that ball forward.
Can you get a little bit more specific for me in the sense that for some of the positional authority that you're describing within the individuals you're
Mhm.
talking to, roughly what
Yeah.
are some of the positions that they hold? So was you also just alluded to there's a lot of maybe there's some rumblings of there's an appetite
Mhm.
here to do some conversations. What is the positional authority for some of the folks there and that you're talking to there? Just to give me a sense of the
Yeah.
layers here.
Certainly. So I talked to the CTO of our school district. He's someone who acknowledged that this is definitely something that everyone is looking into, and this is a conversation that's being had both state and nationwide about how this is going to be integrated into school districts. Although he did confide to me that our school district has not made any progress in that, and it's not something that he's seen being talked about in kind of the district wide executive councils that he's been a part of. I talked with our head of science education for our district, another person who was very receptive to the idea of developing a framework, but again, acknowledged that right now she feels that we are a little bit behind the eight ball here. And then I also spoke with the assistant principal at our school, and again, someone who very much offered up her resources and her assistance in the development of something like this, but has not seen anything in her kind of, in her circles specifically.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that's helpful. So it sounds like a lot of the folks that you were talking to based on my experiences are deciders, but I also want to be
Mhm,
clear that I think some of the things that they're able to decide upon might look drastically different, right? Depending on your
mhm,
roles, right? So one thing you have to keep in mind is that when you're navigating a school or district community, you're going to have a lot of deciders, but the things that they can give you a yes to is going to vary drastically, right? Depending on their role. And some
mhm,
of the things that can make some of your objectives here a little bit more complex is it may also sometimes require multiple approvals from
mhm.
different layers to
Yeah.
do that. And so you need to be thinking about who you're going to for what, and also what's the scaffolded approach here. And I think we can get there in just a second. When I say the scaffolded, I actually
Yeah.
mean so if your North Stars is your school community walks away with a robust AI framework, right? And a scope and sequence slash maybe a plan for AI literacy. That's what I heard,
Mhm.
right? In terms of that's your North
Yeah.
Star. So
Yeah.
if that's like winning at the highest level, then what's the medium level? And then what's the low level? Right. Because then based on some of those trajectories, if we then also have to think through who is most positioned to give us a yes to deliver on that, right? So as an example, just to break this down further so that you're really understanding what I'm dropping down here. Let's say the AI literacy is can feel really robust. It doesn't have to be though, right? AI literacy could be we develop a year-long scope and sequence that is deployed across all of our schools and all of our kids, K to 12. That's like the most aspirational North Star, right? It could also be for it on the very low end, it could mean my ask is that for my group of students or just for the science department, we talk about AI one time during the school year. Both of those are
Mhm,
technically AI literacy, right? But one of those
mhm,
is maybe like a lower outcome, but still gets you closer. It's like laying a brick towards what you want, but not the entire cathedral. And then one is obviously the cathedral, right? It gives you
yeah,
exactly what you want in its most aspirational state. But in a climate with the school district where there's so many deciders that are positioned to
mhm,
give you different things, you have to be very clear on your goals, and then you have to be willing to entertain different
mhm,
scenarios there because it could mean that in year 1, it's just the 60-minute conversation with that, but then maybe in year 2, if it goes well, it expands to the entire high school. And then maybe if that goes
mhm,
well, then it expands to the entire school district. So it eventually gets you where you want to go, but just not immediately. So
yes.
holding that lens while we're also this is will be important. I'm not suggesting that we immediately have to run away from our North Star. I would say let's lead with that, but let's also plan for the medium and low options just in case we have to deploy those. That's really what I'm saying.
I think that makes a lot of
So
sense. I think definitely defining, yeah, where what success looks like in different parts of the spectrum would be useful.
yeah. So we have our objectives here, right, which is this AI framework. We also have
Mhm,
this aspiration for AI literacy. So we're clear-eyed on that. You have
yep,
engaged some of these stakeholders, right?
mhm,
Let's start here first because I think this activity will be something you can also continue on your own as you think about
mhm,
like your full strategy here. But I want to at least table set you for your ability to do this, which is so let's just take first the CTO, the head of science education,
mhm,
and the assistant principal. So based
mhm,
on your relationship with them, we don't even have to go there yet, even just based on their positional authority,
mhm,
based on what you know about their positional authority, what do you think that they're equipped to say yes to? What do they actually have permission to provide you
mhm.
towards this vision versus where are they not the person that you should be talking to? Let's start first with let's do the assistant principal. I think that one might be a little
Okay.
the potentially the easiest here, or you might be most proximal. Assistant principal, what can they say yes to that gets you closer here? What could they actually give you?
The assistant principal would be able to give me stuff much more geared to the teacher AI education. I think they would be able to create profession or carve out time during school-wide staff meetings or department meetings for PD related to this stuff. Additionally, they would be able to. I think that is kind of where the main focus for the assistant principal, the AP would be just
Mm,
how can we where can we find time to do teacher PD regarding AI literacy?
yeah. And that's an important question, obviously, right? If we don't have
Mhm,
the spaces, this ain't happening. And so it sounds
mhm,
like the assistant principal could be a critical decider for the yes there. So
yes.
we want to make sure that we're just documenting that. And so what we're going to start to do now a little bit is like stakeholder mapping, and your assistant principal where they can really say yes is and give you yeses around the timing. Now, there's also this bucket of other things that they likely can be an influencer or a recommender on. Maybe they're not the person saying yes, but they can be a champ, like a someone who supports you and getting the yes
Mm,
from somebody else. So in this case, I would imagine an assistant principal, their highest next level of proximity is really probably going to be the principal, right? So
mhm,
what are
mhm.
there any particular things that you think having an assistant principal that's bought in beyond the timing that they could really help you get the yes from a principal that a principal is positioned to deliver on?
Definitely. I think that kind of, yeah, the higher level initiatives that would be helpful that you would need a principal's okay for would be the actual distribution of some sort of guidelines or framework or the okay to create focus groups among the various stakeholders to discuss and talk about what AI would look like in this particular school.
Yeah, I would just say in my experience working very closely with schools, I would say that I agree with you. I think in my experience, when you think of an assistant principal and what they're positioned to do, they can sometimes really tactically help you with some scheduling pieces or carving out time somewhere to be able
Mhm,
to execute on this. And I think you're right that in terms of what like where they can help you be a co-influencer, they can really help you with the principal. And again, some of this is going to just depending on nuance with some of your school district here and what the
Mhm,
dynamic looks like. But a principal's like oftentimes is able to develop and enact policy for their school-wide community. Now, sometimes that
mhm,
is done in tandem with the school district. It's not mutually exclusive. Something like artificial intelligence, they may end up wanting to go back and forth with the school district and creating some shared alignment there. But there is also a world here where, depending on the scope of some of that policy, like if it was just like a student facing policy or just some guidelines for teachers, that a principal could actually just make a decision, maybe with inputs from just their school community for their school, not for the whole district, but for their school. So that definitely resonates. I also think, too, as you think about the scope of your AI literacy. So if you were like, if your aspiration was to deploy an AI literacy plan for all students in a high school, all teachers in a high school, or all stakeholders rather in a high school, you would clearly need a principal bought into that to be able
mhm.
to. There's no way you're going to do that without a principal being bought in. So
Yeah.
that's where an assistant principal, in addition to actually being a decider in some instances, they can also be an influencer in others. And it's important to think about that because as you're entering conversations with them, you want to be aware of those pieces. The other layer that you wanna be aware of, we'll continue with this AP, and then if you want, we can do it with another stakeholder, but if you feel like you got it, we can transition to another sector of this, but the other thing that's important to enter when you're thinking about conversations with these folks is not just what they're in a position to do. You also want to make sure that you're thinking about how they're entering the conversation. What I mean by that is what are their motivations? What are their values? I think also related to that, you can also think about what are the opportunities as they see it, or what are the challenges as they see it. Fundamentally, this is the simple way to think about it is this: if you are going to create shared alignment with them on something, it has to be worth it for them to do it.
Mhm,
Like if one of your students says, "Mr. Emmett, like I want to change up the whole class. I think you should do your lessons this way." If that is
mhm,
going to put a whole bunch of work on you, or it's going to be like a way that makes grading nearly impossible for you, or you just don't
mhm,
see value in it, like you're like,
mhm.
"Why would I do that?" It literally doesn't make any sense. It doesn't matter if
Yeah,
they think it's a good idea or not. If it doesn't
yeah,
actually make your class better, you're not going to do it. So
yeah.
you want to think about it like hold that lens from their perspective. So if you're coming up to them and I'm an assistant principal, my job is to manage or support, I don't know, 20 other teachers in the building, right? That I'm directly supporting.
Mhm,
That this idea has to provide enough value from my perspective. It can't just be a good idea, quote unquote. It has
mhm,
to really solve problems for me. Or I have to be my values have to be aligned to this and I have to have similar motivations beyond the problems it solves for me to for the chances of my buy-in to increase towards getting you
mhm.
towards the yes, whether the yes is, "Yes, I will give you time," or, "Yes, I will help you influence our principal," which then also is gonna require some, stakeholder mapping there as well. Do you understand what I mean as to why this is important?
Yeah, absolutely. So just kind of ensuring that the assistant principal, there's a value proposition for them as well for this AI initiative.
Yeah, because you just again, keep this in mind. This is the AI thing, right? Is
Mhm.
I think many of us are invested in believe in its promise, but it's not the only thing anybody's doing. Like even for
Yeah.
you, right? Like clearly you're very passionate about this, you care about it. But when you go back to school in a couple of weeks, there's 70 other things that you're going to be asked to hold. You're choosing to
Mhm,
prioritize this because you see the opportunity
mhm.
and the work ahead is to determine like how do we elevate this in the list of priorities for others in your school given the
Yeah,
unique set of things that they're holding, right? Because they're
yeah,
not holding the same things and they equally are worried about student safety. They're worried about achievement, right? They're worried about just
yeah.
logistics of the day. Is everybody in the right class at the right time, right? Those types
Mhm.
of things. And so that is that those are going to be some of the things that you're going to be up against here. We'll talk
Yep.
too about just internal conditions in a second, but let's go back to the assistant principal for a second. So when you think
Yep.
about this assistant principal, their avatar, if you will. So some of
Yeah.
the top level things that you have perceived maybe they're motivated by, that they value. And again, a lot of this could be based on things you've heard them say, things they've directly said to you,
Mhm,
observations in terms of their actions, things that you've seen them do, which could suggest what they're motivated or valued by.
mhm.
Based on that, what is coming up for you?
I think that this particular assistant principal would be excited at the prospect of heading or being in the at the top of some kind of district-wide initiative that's bringing a new perspective or a new opportunity to the school. So I think that's part of the reasons that they were so receptive to this AI integration plan is because they've been kind of searching around and looking for something to lead, something to bring to the principal, something to bring to the superintendent, something to that's going to add value to the entire district, if that makes sense.
What evidence do you have to support that? Why do you think that they would be excited to do? Because I think how I heard what I just heard you
Mhm.
say is that they would be really excited to try a new thing that they could bring to their bosses. Like, why? Why would that actually be something that they were motivated by?
I think that this assistant principal, her first year with this past year, so she's kind trying to look to make her mark, to kind of have her footprint be in the district somewhere. She mentioned that to me point blank a couple different times. That she is exploring all these different avenues and opportunities of where she can add her own value, her own voice to the district. And I think that when we had this conversation about AI, she kind of saw that this as being one of those opportunities to really make her mark.
Got it. Okay, so you walked away from the conversation you had before getting a sense that she was looking to make a shift, right? Which is not uncommon, right? I mean, obviously
Mhm,
you're doing a little bit of that too, right? Usually in a
mhm,
first year in a role, especially in a school, folks are going to take that year to learn, ask questions,
mhm,
observe. And then especially going into that second year, you may want to start to make your changes, right? Make some tweaks based on
yep,
the things that you noticed, trying to tweak that. So I would say like that behavior makes sense given her timing, and it
mhm,
sounds the conversation that you all had aligns with that. So here's one thought. Here's one potential tactic you could take, if it
mhm,
makes sense for you. I mean, given her positional authority and given like your shared goals, you could even bring her in as a co-partner for this
mhm,
launch, right? You could even rather than seeking what I think I've heard you say a little bit is that you have brought her in more for like input, right?
mhm,
Or to give you thoughts of this. You could even bring her in and say, "Hey, I'm like really passionate about doing this. Would you be interested in like co-leading the development of this initiative with me?" Right? Given like her positional
mhm,
authority, what that's going to bring for you in terms of a value proposition is she's going to have access to a different set of conversations than you do. And then you're obviously going to
mhm,
be in spaces that she's not really as proximal to. So I think that gives you both like a set of pretty robust conversations that you
mhm,
all are going to be able to bring into your planning. It sounds like she might be motivated to bring this to. There's a potential sense of shared investment or values there. So that could be one route. You could even bring her in and say, "Hey, would you actually be interested not just in holding space for this, but would you be even be interested in like working on this with me like longer term as we
mhm,
like go from this to that?" And I think then what I would also do if the answer is yes is I think a lot of the conversations that like you and I are having right now, I would be having these same conversations with her. What does she actually think
mhm,
the problem is? What does she think the opportunity
mhm,
is? How does she think we should be going about it? Give her an opportunity to actually co-develop
mhm,
this strategy here that you all are in the process of baking out because obviously the more that she has an opportunity to bake it out, make it her own, to put her spin and vision. She's gonna be more bought in, right? Because it's hers now too. It's
yep,
not just yours, it's hers now too. And so that's gonna increase her
yep,
investment and she's gonna be more willing to go to bat versus you walking into a space with her saying, "Hey, I like have everything figured out. These are all my answers. Here's the playbook."
yep,
That could be a
mhm.
higher value than the efficiency value. You know what I mean?
Definitely. I definitely agree. I really like what you said. I think your assessment of her is actually pretty close to spot on, where I do think that she would value being brought in and feeling bought into this endeavor more than just being brought a framework and either check or X. I think that I do what you also said about her being exposed to the a different side of things than me, right? I'm very much exposed to the intra-teacher side of things, the student-teacher relationship side of things, whereas she is in meetings all day with the district heads and the administrators and kind of the bureaucrats who actually are going to be the ones providing funding or okaying framework. So I do think that kind of seeing both sides of this picture would be very useful, and then working together, trying to bridge those two perspectives could be very helpful.
Yeah, exactly. Because she's gonna have a deeper understanding of some of the systems at play that you're not always
Mhm,
proximal to being a teacher. And
mhm,
she's gonna be able to reflect back a little bit more of some of the values, doing some of the stakeholder mapping from her perspective, as we're starting to do here.
mhm.
Uh, would it be helpful to walk through and do this with one more person, or would you rather we transition to another set of questions? There's some other things that I'm curious at exploring here. but I want to make sure you feel equipped to do this because
Mhm.
fundamentally what I think is going to be very important for you at this stage, especially at a moment where I'm hearing you saying that you're feeling some resistance from folks is I want to
Mhm.
push you to go back to your network, the network of individuals there, and I want you to like really think deeply about what they're positioned to say yes and no to, and what they
Mhm.
value, what they're motivated by, and maybe some of the
Mhm.
problems, and then determine if anything new is being brought up for you based on that. So you had conversations with a couple of folks. I think you perceived that they were kind of saying to you, yeah, that's a good idea, but not really motivating why. I think if you go through and
Mhm.
work through those set of questions, it may give you it
Mhm.
it may potentially illuminate for you why they're not running toward why they're not sprinting towards it.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a
Mhm.
misalignment somewhere that we're not noticing that once we find that misalignment gets us closer to the root of that. Or again, maybe it just means it affirms for us that as we think about the route that we need to head towards trying to get us closer towards this North Star, that's just not a door we need to open, right? Which is okay too. The
Yeah.
beauty of working in a school district is they tend to be very decentralized and there's a lot of ways to get a yes. And there's a lot of
Yeah.
definitions of success. I think, especially with your North Star here, there's a lot of, I mean, we just identified three people that to a certain extent, I think could give you yeses that would get you closer to this
Yeah.
in year one. And then obviously, as
Mhm.
those things unfold, it potentially changed mindsets of individuals along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, I does agree with all that. I think that one thing that I would wanna we can kind of touch base briefly on, doesn't need to be as extensive as we did to the AP, is just I think my understanding of a CTO's role and kind of what they can do to help this initiative may need a little bit of a touch up. From my understanding, and I'm interested in where the chronology of this would be in the broader conversations with other stakeholders, that the CTO's main responsibility would be okaying different tools, different subscription packages for teachers and students to use. That's at least what the takeaway I got from speaking to our CTO was. There's all these tools out there. This is our budget for subscriptions for teacher and student tools. This is kind of what we're currently spending money on for AI-based tools. If we buy an AI-based tool for teachers and students, we're going to need to take away one of the existing tools, right? So kind of where is the overlap between AI-based tools and existing tools? Where would the value be added? That's kind of what he was explaining to me. And so I guess my question to you would be, does that pair well with what you're seeing from other CTOs? And also, is that a conversation that happens further down the line, right? After you develop the framework, after you've spoken with the APs and the students and the stakeholders and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I love the way that you're thinking about it. I would say from my perspective, a couple of things. Number one, the CTO role looks a little bit different everywhere, depending on the size of the school district and the scope of that individual work. The other couple of layers that I've seen from individuals who assume that type of role, which I didn't entirely hear, is just like compliance, especially. So oftentimes there's one or multiple like cybersecurity IT type frameworks that a school district is working through, and also general compliance, right, towards protection of like student data, right? Looking at things such as FERPA, COPPA, all those things that are aligned to some of the tools that a school district may bring in. And keep in mind, we're talking about tools related to AI, but there's also a whole other set of tools related to what makes a school district operate, right? Such as a student information system, things like that, that they're also thinking heavily about that they need to ensure like compliance or working effectively, working some of those. This is a place where it might look a little bit different here. And again, I definitely don't want to assume to know because yours in your school community could look a little bit different. I think what I would also say, and I heard you leaning into this, so I would definitely invite you to continue to do this. When you're talking about folks, just ask. I think it sounds like you were doing that. Keep doing that. You can ask somebody, hey, I don't have a lot of experience on what you do. If you could describe to me like some of the big buckets of your role, could you actually describe to me what are some of the things that like you do with your time? And from a place of curiosity, I think a lot of folks are excited to talk about what they do. And then the nice thing about doing that is you don't have to assume. He's telling you exactly like what he does. And then as you start to understand that, it may give you a better sense of what he is in position to really say yes or no to, or where he might have a really strong opinion versus instances where he's like, oh, that sounds cool. But honestly, I sign off for the budgets. That's what I do. And then my team does the approval for tools they recommend and I sign off, but I don't, you know what I mean? I'm not really vetting the tools in the same way as an example. So that's the thing that makes that a little bit tricky is every team depending on your configuration of individuals on that team, it's gonna look a little bit different. It also just depends on personality and style, right? People who get promoted to that role with a certain set of backgrounds, they may have a certain inclination towards specific layers of that work based on their prior set of experiences. An example would be like if, let's say, you have the CEO of a company, and prior to that, they all of their experiences were in program. So if they're promoted to CEO, they're probably really going to care about all of the specifics of the program because they know that really well. Whereas if somebody who gets promoted to CEO was from like a CFO background, finance, and they may care a lot about the budget and the sustainability, they may have that. But when it comes to like program, they're like, I trust my CPO to take care of that. Like they got it. You know what I mean? And they may not poke and prod as hard. So that also plays into this, right? What somebody's prior set of experiences, like where is their subject matter expertise in addition to their positional authority, right? In some of those things. So it can be complex. And I think, again, in instances where you don't know, if you feel like you can ask, just ask. Say, hey, I'm curious about what you do. Can you tell me more? And that might actually help take the guessing game out of this. So all that to say, you had a great question. Your question was, what is he in position to say yes or no to, or how does he fit into this strategy? Is maybe the better way to. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I will say that I think I agree with with something I heard you saying as you were repeating that out, which is when I think about the three individuals you just gave me, and I think about your North Stars, which is an AI framework and an AI literacy, I think you can achieve bricks on both of those like very quickly without the support of the CTO or without getting any types of yes or nos, like even if they're neutral. The CTO is not going to be in a position to give you like timing for stuff. I don't think that they're going to be a decision maker on like scope and sequence for what those lessons look like for students or for teachers. I think that's a different set of. So I feel like a lot of the AI literacy components that you engage into, you don't need them like necessarily as a approver. Now, that being said, I mean, they could potentially be a great ally for information here if they do have some expertise, if there's some other district initiatives around protection of student data or those things. It feels like those types of conversations could really go hand in hand with things such as deep fakes and bringing in some of those policies to bolster the alignment of some of these lessons so that it doesn't feel like this separate one-off thing that Emmett plus an assistant principal are doing, but it feels like something that truly is coming from the entire school district, which I think is a great thing. Where possible, you want to create alignment between shared initiatives, and to do that well, it requires conversations with a lot of different individuals. It's tricky work, and it's obviously can be difficult, but the more you can create shared alignment, that also then starts to plant seeds and it helps you to develop ally for some of the later asks later on. As an example would be because I do think as you get to the AI framework stage, depending on how robust of a framework that is, you may actually need the sign off or at least the input of the CTO to be able to do that. Now, again, I think it just depends on the scope of that. If stage one of this is actually we're just developing like AI guidelines for students, and that is like a scale of like how to use it plus like a policy, I mean, honestly, that's probably something that just lives in house, right? I think even you and the assistant principal could work on that. You could probably submit it with the principal or have a conversation with the broader school, get some feedback, tighten that up, and then you adopt it as a school. I don't think you would need the support of a CTO to do that. But then all of a sudden, now if you're talking about more robust AI guidance, like protocols for, what tools are considered or are not considered related to AI, what is our policies there? I mean, that if anything will be driven through their office, right? Versus your individual kind of grassroots initiative. It would be more likely that they are actually owning that process, and you get to obviously play a role to support that, maybe collect input and provide input, but they would actually be the owner and the approver in that circumstance. It would not be you if it ends up being that high stakes, because now you're talking about like a district framework policy and those pieces. But again, I think part of that just depends on when we say AI framework, what is it exactly that we're looking? Because I think if we're looking for like general guidelines for use cases, as you described, for teachers plus students, honestly, I think a lot of that you could do in house, like with just your school community. And I think you will likely be the pathway to success here is I don't think will require that many layers of yeses. I think probably if you get your administration bought in, your principal, potentially your principal has to report up to the superintendent, depending on the size of the school district. But if it's a little bit of a larger school district, likely your principal is in a position to make decisions on like policies and things like that related to this. Now, they may end up having a conversation with the superintendent or the assistant superintendent, again, depending on how many layers there are, and they may ultimately determine that, "No, this is probably something we should try to get right for the whole district at once." At that point, it may get a little bit more complex, but I think that is yet to be determined, but the process for doing that, I think, lives through your administration upwards. It doesn't live through a separate office upwards.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense.
It I think it is worth actually spending just a second talking about the science education angle,
Mhm.
because from my perspective, that's a little bit outside of the scope of the adoption we've been talking about, but I do actually think they can be a valuable ally in this, and I'm curious what your perspective is there. So let me just ask you this based on everything we've talked about thus far, everything coming up for you. How do you well, like what do you think they would be in a position to give you yeses on, and like how do you think they can support like the development of this AI framework or AI literacy?
Yeah, I think that they would be very helpful in the student side. They are the ones who kind of develop the essentially the scope and sequence for science education throughout the calendar year, right? So they decide, okay, for biology, we're going to spend 4 weeks learning this, 5 weeks learning this, physics, same thing, chemistry, et cetera, et cetera. So they would be the ones who would be able to say, okay, it's imperative that we teach students some sort of AI literacy, have them have some sort of understanding about how AI is gonna be a co-pilot in their education or whatnot, and they would be able to actually help co-develop lesson plans. They would be able to help carve out time in the school year to have lesson plans. They would be able to coordinate teachers all they'd be able to coordinate AI lessons across different classes to ensure that there's not one teacher in one class spending a full week on AI literacy. Maybe it's one lesson here in bio class, one lesson in physics class, etc.
So when you say coordinate across classes, can you clarify what you mean by classes for me? Across grade levels or across the entire like all subjects?
So across both. So I think that she works hand in hand with the leads for the other subjects as well. So I think that a big thing that our school is working on is cross disciplinary lessons. So how can we tie in what a student's learning in biology with what they're reading in their ELA class, right? So I think that there is a precedent and there is an appetite for kind of this cross subject collaboration when it comes to teaching a subject. I think AI can fit right into that.
So when you look at the schedule of your school, do you all have any type of advisory blocks or anything like that that could potentially be spaces we could ask for at the onset to do some of these lessons? Are there any spaces that
We
really come to mind, or do you think it's gonna have to happen during like a content class time?
so our school just restructured the class schedule and there's no more advisory block. So it's the only time kids are in a classroom is when they're actually getting taught a subject matter.
Got it. So you're yeah, so your students are like in a 6 period day, every single
Hmm.
period is a class. Other than that, it's just
Yep.
lunch. That's kind of like
Yep.
what we're
Exactly.
talking. Okay, cool. So then you're absolutely right. We're gonna have to get the buy-in potentially of one of these subject matter teachers, right? Or one of the grade levels or one of the
Yeah.
content areas to determine potentially where these lessons will live. If we now where it gets a little bit tricky here is, again, I don't exactly know what the decision making process looks like it within your school community for the timing specifically. As an example, what I mean by that is if the assistant principal plus the principals said it was a good idea, and then they just said, like, we want this to happen during English, the English content area, as an example, that I don't know if that's like a possibility, because then if that's the case, obviously, then there could be a world where, let's say once a quarter, 4 times over the school year, you have those teachers delivering this lesson and they were the ones who decided that. I would imagine that obviously the English department would have a say, even if they didn't get to decide, they would at least be able to have some input. But that's not what I'm not exactly sure about, is if the decider in that instance is actually the grade level or the content area, because it could be. It could actually be that the assistant principal or principal goes up to head of science education, says, "Hey, are you interested in this?" And then if they say no, then it's done. In which case, buy-in is really important to get them bought in, as or at least pick one content area and getting them bought in as well. Because as I think you've identified, that if it's going to happen, if that's like our vehicle for bringing students into this and teaching them, then we do have to have one content area willing to pilot this.
Yep.
So when you talked to the head of science education, what were some of your takeaways of that conversation related to the earlier lenses we talked about, their what is motivating them, their values, maybe potentially challenges that they're just experiencing outside of AI, just related to
Mhm.
being the head of science education, like what was coming up there for you? What were you noticing?
So yeah, what I noticed with her most is kind of that allocating attention to this is a little would extend her bandwidth beyond what she's wanting to do right now. We're in the process of kind of trying to outsource our science curriculum to a third party. There's a lot of moving pieces there. Just kind of explained to me that how that was giving her a couple different headaches. So she definitely acknowledged, yes, this is something that we need to do. This is a problem we have. However, if you want to take a stab at this, go ahead. But she said that right now I'm not in a position to really work with you on this. I think she would fall into the category of bring her a finished polished proposal and then have her say yes or no versus having her come in as a co-pilot.
So the head of science education, are they a teacher or is that their role to just develop alignment across all of the science disciplines?
It's their role,
Okay. And is it just for the high school or is it for all of the entire school district?
the entire school district.
Got it. Okay. So this individual is looking for K to 12 alignment across all
Mhm.
sciences. Yeah. That capacity is going to be real. Does she manage a team? Are there individuals under her that she supports?
Just the individual science leads at each school, but those are also teachers. So there's each department has a teacher who functions as the lead of that school as well.
Yeah, so you probably have a grade level chair and then like a head of each of the content areas, right?
Yes,
Across like the core.
correct.
Yeah. Mhm. Have you approached the lead at your school about this?
I have, I have, and they essentially said that's going to be the lead that the science head's job. So they kind of pointed me upwards to this science head.
Got it. And when you talked to her, she was essentially like, I I'm fine with it, but I'm tired. I got a bunch of stuff to do.
Pretty much.
So have you gone back to the lead at your school since then to say, "Hey, they were okay with it. They just don't have, like, capacity to do it right now, but they were okay with us, like, exploring something if we wanted to." Have you had that conversation with the lead at your, school yet? And what was your reaction there if you did? I see you nodding.
Yes, I have, and the lead told me that's great, and then she said, why don't you go and talk to the assistant principal to see if you can carve out PD time, essentially.
PD time for the teachers.
Yes,
Yeah, because so essentially what they're saying is, like, this I ain't I'm not trying to, like, add anything to my plate too. That's how I'm receiving that. Is that how you received it?
that's exactly how I received it as well. A lot of acknowledgement that this is a problem, this is something that I think we should be moving forward on, but, you should be moving forward on that. I kinda want I'll sit back and watch the show.
Have you is this that individual teacher, the science lead at your school, would you categorize them as one of the teachers that does have context on AI, has played around with tools, or are they somebody who falls in the camp of not really messed around it at all, like, kinda stayed in their lane? Like, where would they fall on that spectrum for you?
They have played around with tools, and they even occasionally email the whole science team and say, "Oh, came across eduate.ai today. Could be
Mm,
helpful. Take a look at it," stuff like that.
got it. So they have some context and use it. Okay. It's bringing up a couple of things for me. So number one, what I think just like general advice I would offer you as you're entering some of these conversations with stakeholders is don't be afraid to ask the questions that might be sitting there. And so in this particular case, as an example, if I was talking with them in the future, I might even ask them like, hey, I really noticed that you seem to be invested in like using some of these tools. I've seen you share it and your recommendations have been especially helpful,
Mhm.
even in like in my own learning. But one thing I'm noticing is it seems like when we're talking about exploring potentially having conversations with our students, like you don't seem to be as enthusiastic about that. Is there something like that we're up against that makes it difficult at this time? What are we up against here? And then I think just like leading with curiosity, trying to understand because you and I, it seems like are both receiving the sentiment there that she's not interested at this time. But what we don't know is why. We don't actually know why there's a no. It could be that she's tired and she feels like she has to do it, or it could be we don't have the resources. Oh, there's 50 things happening in the science club, the science standards, and literally when I'm plotting out the entire calendar, there's just not a day. We don't know what the barrier is, right? So we don't actually know if that barrier is a conquerable one, like it is something we can overcome, or if it's like, oh no, no matter what I say or no matter how we try, you're not going to be down for this. In which case, that is going to require a different set of actions for us. It may require us to have conversations with some of the other leads in the other departments and determine would they be willing to try something out, right? Or fit something on. That could be a potential scenario there, but it all kind of depends on what is coming up there. I don't know if something has already come up for you or if you don't have an answer yet.
So I can definitely give more context there. My guess is it would be the former. This science lead for our school was it was her first year in this position, and she was kind of thrown into it last minute when the previous lead left abruptly at the beginning of the school year. Additionally, the science department also had the science coach leave pretty late in the school year. So this lead was trying to simultaneously figure out this new role while trying to cover for the absence of a science coach while trying to teach her classes. Right. So I think that her plate was just way too full. I think she genuinely would be excited about this kind of if the variables were different, right? If she had a more capacity to help out. But I do think that she would be helpful and supportive.
Got it. So I think what I'm hearing you saying is that, and this is not atypical for any public school environments in 2024 in America, right? In the United States, which is school turnover, right? There's school turnover happening. Obviously, what people don't always talk about is like when somebody leaves, that work just doesn't disappear. It usually falls disproportionately
Yeah,
on other people, whether it's like folks transition into new roles or now the work of a role just falls on somebody's plate. And it sounds like she has been kind of caught in experiencing a little bit of that in last year, and that obviously makes it difficult for her to entertain any new type of things that she might be willing to take on here.
exactly.
So, what I'm curious about is within her particular instance, if we maybe based on that context, she might actually be somebody that falls into you get the yes from her through efficiency plan tactic that I talked about. So unlike
Yes.
what you might be doing with the assistant principal, actually with her potentially, if you do just have a plan, I believe that
Hmm.
or so I, like to be crystal clear, right? I think we should be doing AI literacy for our school community means 3 touch points over the year. One is focused on how to use AI in schools and communicating that to students. One's focused on deepfakes. One's focused on whatever topic you're interested in.
Hmm.
Those days will happen these days or within these windows, maybe to offer a little
Hmm.
bit more flexibility. I've identified a couple of teachers to do this myself, blah, 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 blah. And I will be working to develop these lessons, or I will work with these two people to do that. And really, what I just want to know is could this work? Would this proposal work? Maybe she would actually enter better if it doesn't make her have to do a lot of stuff, right? I think it sounds
Hmm.
like she's pretty tapped out. It sounds like she has some investment. Clearly, she's understanding and using these, but at this particular moment, getting her to do anything else is difficult given all she holds. So if we really see her as like a key ally in testing some of this AI literacy, it could be
Hmm.
that she is best positioned to give us the yes, so that's okay happening through science. And I'm working with either myself and two other teachers to pilot a lesson. And then what I would do if I were you is I would then codify the findings from that, take pictures where possible, but share those internally amongst your school. Maybe make sure your students have a
Hmm.
media release, but I'm sure your school district priority has that. Make sure that
Hmm.
if you have the slide deck ready or whatever way that you're engaging with that, you have that. If you can administer a survey after, ask students before, hey, what's your experience on AI? What are some of the things you have? And then administer one
Hmm.
after. It could be a quick thing, 5 questions, and share some of that data across your science department or the whole
Yep.
school. And then based on that, it could end up being that maybe the whole school community now wants to do it, or maybe more science classes want to do it. Maybe because they see how that
Hmm.
went and they see everything's already packaged, right? They see that you have
Yep.
delivered to them the two lessons and the positive feedback went well. Maybe then that now will incline them to say, okay, well, I'll try that with my students. Like it seems easy enough. It's you've now made it lower lift for them. You've removed some of those hidden
Yes.
costs to entry for them.
Yes. Yeah, I think that sounds like a great idea. Yeah, just lowering that activation energy, making it as easy as possible for them to say yes. I definitely agree.
Yeah. Now, one thing we haven't totally explored within this is what is your capacity to take some of these things on? I know you're obviously very excited and interested, but
Mhm,
I mean, if somebody said, Emmett, this is a great idea, let's pursue it, go back and do it. Do you feel like you have time to develop a bunch of AI literacy lessons or do some of these things to do that? What is it? You're a teacher.
mhm,
That's a big role, big responsibility, right? And so
mhm.
we also want to make sure we're checking in on your capacity because that's a very important piece of this equation too.
Yes, I think I'm in a lucky position where I am energized by the work and excited to do it. Although I think there's a limit to that. I guess a lot of it is I would need to really, as of right now, I don't have a clear picture of how much that kind of work would entail. I have an idea. I think I could very comfortably allocate 10 to 12 hours, maybe even more if I include weekends beyond my teaching responsibilities to kind of to work on this. So as long as all the work would fall into it wouldn't be a second full-time job, I think that I can manage.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you're allocating that much time, I would say you're definitely in a position where you could develop a couple of lessons for a low scenario there. So I think if we're talking about what your class periods are probably what, 50, 60 minutes, something like that.
Yep, 60.
Yeah, so you could probably develop like a high level AI lesson within some of
Yeah.
that time. There's a lot of resources online, which I'll connect you on here at
Mhm,
this time as well, where you're able to like leverage some of those. There's a lot of great AI guidance frameworks that exist. There are a lot of videos. I know I shared with you before. I have a lot of podcasts, so hopefully this is
mhm.
not something you have to create from scratch, but it's something more of
Yeah,
like you're compiling resources for your students
yeah.
to be able to have conversations and
Mhm,
to test something out. I think the other layer, which we haven't talked totally about, and then what I'm going to do is to kind of move us towards making this a little more concrete because I know we've been floating in a lot of couple of spaces
mhm.
now, and hopefully this has been helpful to clarify. But like
Yeah.
just to synthesize this a little bit, so we talked a little bit about the AI framework in terms of clarifying what exactly it means for you, and just to recap that part, the literacy. Well, let me pause for a second. The literacy piece as it relates to the students, do you feel like clear on some of the next steps there? I'll synthesize those again, but just I want to make sure that you're feeling clear for the students. Do you feel like you have an understanding of who to go to and how you might be able to take steps towards making that happen?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and I'll synthesize that in just a second. But again, the nice thing is even with just some of the stakeholders you named, you might be able to get like your plan enacted just between the
Mhm,
AP and the head of science in the best case scenario. But in the obviously in a more likely scenario or worst case, you may have a couple of other layers of folks to bring in. But I don't disagree with you that those two individuals feel the right places to start and to continue to engage for student AI literacy exploration. I think part of what you still have to figure out is the scope, right? So AI literacy aspirationally, every single grade in the school district, multiple times over the year sounds like a great idea. But if it's just not possible right now because of the barriers, start smaller. That's okay. It still gets you closer, right? Starting smaller could mean one lesson. It could mean two lessons. But then in your mind, as you're starting to plan this out, and again, we can take more steps towards this later on. Just because, so if that's your north star, you want to think about you want to then to start also breaking that down of this is my most aspirational vision, but then what's the year 1 goal? What's the year 2 goal? What's the year 3 goal? And then ideally over the course of 3 to 5 years, like building out some of the pieces that you want to have, and obviously accelerating or decelerating your timeline based on some of the conversations there. Because another thing that you said earlier, which actually this is a good time to hit that thread before we fully transition to the framework pieces, the cross disciplinary. I could see a lot of cool possibilities for projects that your entire school might be able to do around AI literacy and bring in that interdisciplinary component. Like a most aspirational AI literacy state I could see is what if you all did like a capstone where it was like a capstone where all grades are together. It's say like a significant project that it counts as a grade across all four content areas and students were able to use AI tools to develop this project. Maybe the project is, let's say, a 2 or 3 week long project based learning experience where it's solve a problem in the world and break it down, give us your steps, give us your policy recommendation. And it's a problem that encompasses all, and you can use AI to support you with that. I think that would be a really cool aspirational North Star, but obviously you'd have to do a lot of things to build up to that, right? That's not going to be like right off the bat that you do that. It may start with just 1 or 2 lessons, but as you do that, real quickly you're going to start to snowball into that, right? You can get
Mhm.
there. It just has to, you may have to start a little smaller depending on what the school climate is like.
Yeah.
Any how does that land for you? Any like reactions or anything for you before we hit this other layer here for a little bit?
I think that all makes sense. I think it gives me a lot to think about for sure. And then, yeah, I think once we kind of talk into the nitty gritty of the frameworks, I think it'll be very helpful to see how those two kind of these two pieces dovetail together and really work together to give some concrete next steps.
Yeah, so that's helpful. I appreciate that, and I'm happy we landed there. The so to take a little bit of a pivot to the framework piece, I think to a certain extent the framework piece does actually start with AI literacy, which is actually a nice
Mhm.
segue into this conversation. The literacy, though, as we were alluding to, has to happen with the adults. So once the adults start to get more context building, they start to get to have more conversations around AI,
Mhm.
then I think the likely trajectory in my experience for most places where I've been able to do this or have conversations is usually it starts with your organization, whether it's like a school community, a grade level team, or an entire school district, having conversate like awareness conversations, right? What is AI? What does it do? Those types of things. And then usually the very next step after having some of those awareness conversations is it then drives towards, well, we need to just be clear on like our policy for our school or our framework. It usually leads to frameworks that we want to instill. After then the frameworks, then we're starting to take steps towards like adoption in some type of way, whatever that looks like for our school. But I think your arc, the way that you're thinking about your arc is right, but we wanna start with literacy before the framework. So, the reason that that's important too is I know obviously it sounds like you've noticed that there's quite a few individuals in your building that have some context on AI, but you wanna make sure that you're creating some shared alignment for everybody in your building. Everybody needs to understand and have a similar set of experiences as to what this is, why it's important, how I can use it collectively before we can like really drive towards policy. Because in developing a policy, number one, you want to make sure that it's comprehensive where possible. And really, what I mean by comprehensive is not that it addresses all the things ABC, because that might be difficult to do right now because it continues to
Mhm.
evolve. But more so, what I mean by comprehensive is that your inputs are comprehensive. Everybody in the school got to have a say from their unique lens that they hold. The school counselors got to share their perspective, teachers got to share
Mhm.
their perspective, right? Maybe paraprofessionals got to share their perspective, administrators got to share their perspective, and that it is considerate of all of those unique stakeholder groups before we're making a
Mhm.
decision on what this policy is going to look like, depending on the scope. Now, if it's obviously something that only impacts a couple of groups, maybe then only those couple of groups need to be involved. So something like
Yep.
a like an AI grading policy may actually only involve a couple of set of groups, maybe not. So it just kind of
Yep.
depends on how your school determines that. So here's the difficult part of this piece, which is like timing ain't great for this. My
Mhm.
recommendation is for an AI literacy thing obviously would be we would want to try to find a time to do session during these teacher training weeks that are about to happen, right?
Yeah.
That would be like the north. That would be like an easy
Yeah.
layup, right? Because this is literally a bunch of days where teachers are coming together. The challenge though is it tends to be prime time, and in my experience, there's not a lot of time up for grabs, but sometimes there is. Believe it
Mhm.
or not, actually, when I was a teacher, there was a couple of times where I was able to get time, even in asking during those weeks where I was
Mhm.
able to, and that was a possibility. So it makes me think that one initial next step here is potentially going back to your ally, the assistant principal, and seeing
Mhm.
she's probably going to have more context on what those weeks are going to look like, right? The agendas, how those are
Mhm.
shaping out, and maybe to get her advice on if something like that was possible. Now, if it's not possible as a separate module, maybe there's a way to be creative about it. Maybe it could happen as a lunch and learn for the
Mhm.
lunchtime part that you all have, right? Maybe that's like a way to do it is like any teachers that were interested in doing it. I think it might, if you do a lunch and learn, it might be difficult to make that mandatory. But if you're able to obviously get a
Mhm.
separate block of time, you could. Or if there's any section of those teacher trainings, like I know in my experience, there tends to be parts of some of those days where there might be a breakout component, like multiple modules happening, and teachers either
Mhm.
get to decide or they go. Maybe there's a way to get like a breakout session added during one of those times of the day that if that's something that exists within that agenda. The point is I think that you potentially have a window where there would be a really good opportunity to design a conversation to try to ramp up literacy, because the first step of this, as I just described, is awareness. You have to work to build the shared alignment across your entire school community on what AI is and starting to bring those in before I think we can really drive towards a policy. So we have to start to do that. So what's coming up for you? Do you think there might be opportunities here? Is there something that I didn't bring up that you're noticing or you're thinking about?
I think that this pre-first day of classes idea, I would love to do that, but I think, as you mentioned, those spots are hard to come by, especially for our school. We only have 2 days of this PD time, and one of those days is allocated to a full district kind of talk in the gymnasium. So that's not even there's not even opportunity for kind of breakout sessions there. So that kind of leaves one day where realistically this could happen. And I wouldn't be, I'll definitely reach out and give it a soldier's try, but I'd be surprised if there was an opportunity there. So I'm trying to think of what is some of this early in the school year times that where there would be an opportunity to work with an AP to try to carve out even 5 or 10 minutes. I think that and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this, but it wouldn't even be necessary to really dive deep at, but even to introduce this idea into the dialogue of the teachers and of the community. Oh, AI is something that's really coming to the forefront of education, right? We want to, as a community, think about what our relationship with it is going to be. Hopefully, we can have some more talks into the future. Just want to kind of introduce this as an idea and maybe get people talking and thinking about it.
Yeah, I think you're thinking about it the right way in the sense that you're also trying to reimagine like the timing piece. I think that's going to be a good framework to take as you like a good mental model to take as you are thinking about how this happens with your school community until more folks can be bought in, right? And help to carve out some of those spaces, which is like, what are maybe some bite-sized components? The nice thing is a lot of those things exist. As an example, I just released a course with a platform provider named Phobiz that's all about AI detectors, which is I know like a really big topic in school communities. A lot of folks obviously are quick to resort to AI detection tools. It's free and it's 30 minutes. So that could even be something that if you watch in a review and you feel like it actually makes sense for some of the conversations in your school community, you might even be willing to share that with folks there because it at least gives them some context on why AI detectors don't really work. Instead, what are some things that you could do? Because, and the reason I think that could be important is one of the questions I heard you talk about earlier around what needs to be addressed is obviously we need potentially some literacy as well as a framework around to what extent AI should be used by students. And obviously, in order to do that well, you have to there's a couple of things that I think need to be true, and in that video, which again is 30 minutes, I offer 7 ideas and what you can use, and then I think from my perspective, I think what you would be driving towards over this year, I think it's very feasible to do this over the year, by the way, I don't think that feels like an unrealistic timeline, is I do think if your school community could adopt an AI assessment scale, so like a specific policy that you all use as a school community to basically identify assignments like on a red, yellow, green scale or like a 0 to 5 scale on what extent AI can be used in assignments versus not. And they're really encouraging teachers to use that to make clear to their students, like, this is a full green, you can use AI assignment, or this is a no fly zone, right? This is a red assignment. And then those layers in between. That feels like a very realistic outcome for year one of this next year. I think you could do that in year one. I think it would start with some awareness, right? And then it would lead towards, hey, this is a problem we're all going to have. So, like, this, in my experience, this is how you address it, and proposing that to your school community so that they're aware that this is like something that's happening. And then fundamentally working on creating one that works for your school district or adopting one that feels like it makes sense for you all. So, just in terms of the arc, I don't see that out of the realm of possibilities for year one in terms of what you all could accomplish.
I think that sounds great, very feasible, and I think very productive and helpful as well. In terms of this AI literacy for teachers, I would be curious to hear what you think. From my perspective, everything kind of all of these AI questions, all these AI tools and this AI integration kind of flows downstream from understanding a little bit of how the technology actually works, right? Why do hallucinations happen? Why are there biases? How does the training data affect the output, right? Why is prompting a thing, right? There seems to be so many misconceptions, right? If someone does not have a lot of technological literacy, and they're interacting with an AI chatbot, it's very natural to feel like you're talking to something sentient, something that really understands the world around it and the questions that are being asked. But I think that kind of understanding a little bit of that computer science engineering background really is very helpful when interacting with these tools and understanding how to use them, when to use them, etc. But I'd be curious to hear kind of your perspective on is phase zero, right? Just a basic tutorial on what is going on behind the scenes of these AI tools.
Yeah, I would say I what you're saying definitely resonates in my experience when if given the time to like work with teachers or with stakeholders individually, usually the first thing I do is try to immediately solve a problem that I know that they're experiencing and go there for even before I explain what AI is, even before I explain anything else, I try to do that first. So if there is some way for you to be able to do that asynchronously, say, hey, even before we talk about what AI is, let me explain to you like how it solves problems because as when you are working in a school, your time is your most valuable commodity. So I'm not going to use anything with my time that I don't have to, or that I'm not being voluntold to do, right? That is not actually in service of solving the problems that I have. I don't have time. I'm tired. So if that is the case, I immediately, within seconds of having a conversation with somebody, have to prove to them that this is going to solve a problem for them. And if it doesn't, I've lost them. It doesn't actually matter how it works because they don't care. So if there's a way, so what I would recommend, and again, I'm happy to help talk through this a little bit. And again, let's be clear, a lot of what we're about to talk about, you can find stuff online and leverage some of those too. You might be able to like use, but also this is great use cases for AI. This is literally how you can use, you know what I mean? I think you could immediately go to ChatGPT and say, hey, for school counselors, what are some of the biggest problems that using a tool like ChatGPT could solve? Boom. And then ask it to give you 100 ideas and then pick your favorite three, like three that you actually know working with school counselors that would they would really resonate. Do the same thing with science teachers, math. Your first slide of this slide deck could be, hey, here's three problems that it solves for every single person in this building. Before I even that's slide number one, right? And then hopefully then it piques their curiosity, right? And then they're interested. And then you say, now the next five corresponding slides are explaining to you some basics that you kind of need to know to be able to use this well. One could be, what the heck does that word prompt engineering means? I actually have a whole 15-minute lesson on that. So again, if you want to use a lesson, you don't have to come up with something. You could put my link in there. That's 15 minutes and it solves you. You don't have to do anything, right? You could take a bullet point, add it, say this is what this is, boom, done, right? The next thing, as you described, it could be related to maybe like the training implications if you want to give folks a little back end. Or maybe what you could do is you could have a couple of slides that are like, this is the very basic essentials. And then here's a couple of like extra mile slides if you want to actually geek out with me a little bit. And some of those could be like training implications or how some of these models like interact with each other, or how what's an AI agent. You could do some of that if you wanted to, very aspirational. You don't have to, but you could. I like this idea of trying to develop like a highly engaging slide deck that could even be something that's just shared across the whole school and using that as almost a little bite-sized thing. I still think that potentially your best next step is to talk to the assistant principal first and get some of her perspectives and get her take. And depending on what she says, because what also could be an option here, which we didn't fully get to, is I recognize there may not be a lot of time at the beginning of the year, but I also recognize your school district likely has a lot of like professional development days throughout the year. So if there's one coming up in September, October, that could still be early enough where folks are kind of settled into the year, not as worried about the year startup, but it's still early on enough to where maybe there could be a space to do a little bit more of a robust conversation, and that might actually be the better place to make a first impression. So I think the jury is still out as to what the best initial tactic could be. Potentially, you ultimately obviously get to decide what you want to do, but that may also be another option you could leverage here to start that awareness.
Yeah, that's great. I really love the idea of solving a problem for the teachers because I think at the end of the day, right, everything else is window dressing. If you don't ground it in, how is this going to make your life easier? Why should you care? So I think I definitely want to spend some time looking at our stakeholders, our teachers, counselors, paras, etc., and think what is the best use case for AI for our community, and then even before any kind of PD or even before any kind of synchronous interaction or lesson about AI. I love the idea of sending kind of an asynchronous, right? here's an example of how AI can make your life easier. And then it goes from another hassle or another AI tool that our school district is foisting upon us to, sorry, another tech tool that our school district is foisting upon us to, oh, here's something that can actually improve and help my teaching practice on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. And the other thing that I think in that slide deck you could consider doing, which we didn't totally lay out, so just to be more explicit, you could have a what problems does it solve for you slide. You could also have a like why should you care slide. And on that slide, I mean, we talked about some of the student literacy pieces, but you could also name those on this slide so that it's clear to the stakeholders in your school community that, hey, some of those problems that feel very frustrating with your students that you're dealing with right now, some of those actually are being caused by AI. So if we don't actually do anything to address it, those are still going to be problems in your class. And I think some of the examples we gave earlier around like some of the deep fakes, if students are coming in with misconceptions, well, if we don't do anything to have conversations with them, that's going to continue to be a problem that you experience. So that they can also be aware of some of the things that their students may be experiencing that may be brought into their classroom or into their coaching conversations with students that they may not be connecting in the same way. They're not connecting the dots that the reason that that's an exacerbated problem is because of the same artificial intelligence thing that we're talking about. So that could also be another slide that you might consider adding is like what problems does it solve for you, but also broadly for education for our school, why should you care? And then maybe getting into a couple of some of the basics here of like where could you go to interact with this tool first? When how do you use it? Very basically now, as you're doing that, you wanna also this is actually a place where you might be able to leverage some of the folks in your in some of that other department with the CTO. You wanna make sure that you have the green light with any tools you might be using as an example or advising in there. So as an example, if you're saying, "Oh, go to a tool like ChatGPT or Claude," make sure that your school district is actually allowing that to be used in your school, like on school desktops and computers. You don't wanna, like, endorse those tools and then later there's some blowback that like you told a bunch of teachers to use ChatGPT and this is actually banned on our laptops or something. You want to make sure that there's shared alignment there. That could be a great follow-up point for your next conversation with the CTO saying, hey, actually, this is my vision for something I want to do for the school, very low lift, just to spread awareness. I'd like to be able to talk about a tool that folks might be able to go to and to use. Now, some of these tools obviously are already integrated into websites. So you could even just ask if those are acceptable, such as Gemini, Perplexity, tools like now Perplexity is a little bit different in the sense that it's a search engine. It's not like a large language model. So you may want to, if you use that, you may want to distinguish that. I don't know how far you want to bring folks into this, but just something to, but then the other one obviously could just be like Edge, Microsoft Edge or whatever they call it. I think it's Edge, isn't it? It's the or Bing, not Edge.
Big, yeah,
Talking
yeah.
about Bing. Yeah, Bing, the one that has the integration with the ChatGPT on it. I usually just use the direct model, which is why I'm fuzzy a little bit here. So
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree with all that. I think another thing that I would want to think about it in the slide deck, would it be useful? Would it be useful to present the current landscape of AI tools and the use cases from demonstrations of these AI and education, like 2.0 tools that we talked about, right? Different Magic School, EduAid, School AI, stuff like that. Or would it be more useful to kind of start with the original models, GPT, Claude, and stuff like that? I'm trying to think about what the best presentation or best introduction to AI use cases would be for teachers who may either have a very brief exposure to them or not at all.
yeah, I it's a great question. I think part of that will be determined by what your school district says is acceptable, because some of those secondary tools, obviously, as well, they may not actually endorse individuals in their school district using some of those tools based on their policies, their data privacy, and those pieces. So I think you definitely have to get clear-eyed on that. In my experience, I would say regardless of what route you go, I think it's very important to keep it simple and not overwhelm full folks with tools. I would just pick one. So if it's only picking one, I would likely recommend sticking with a broader generalized model just because it that way it like really gets them to understand like how they can use it. You could also consider doing one generalized tool and then one more specialized tool just to highlight the difference or doing screenshots. Like if your school is doesn't approve a lot of these, you could like use screenshots for one of the tools and say, obviously, this is not acceptable on school devices. But obviously, if you're using your cell phone and with your personal data and you decide that this is a tool helpful for your craft, like that might be an option that you exercise, right? But what I would not do is inundate teachers with a whole bunch of tools. Number one, because as you all develop your vision, that vision needs to be grounded in the opportunity and the problems that you're hoping to solve, regardless of AI. I think it needs to be grounded in that. And then I think it needs to be then taken to the layer of like, how does AI solve this? And then like step number 5 is what tools or programs or products support us with this vision and the tools that we see. But it doesn't start with that, right? It's not about just adopting a bunch of tools and starting there. That is the byproduct of a clear vision and a defining a clear role for how AI should support our school district, not the start. And so I think it's very important to not send a message that AI is just like one tool and here's a different tool for that, here's a different tool for that, different tool for that, and making folks think that that's what AI is. Because as we were alluding to earlier, a lot of the AI use cases right now in education have really been focused on generative AI, and they've been focused on these tools that have created very scaffolded use cases. But as you and I talked about, the conversations we need to have about AI are not just about that. We need to talk about deepfakes and the implications there, right? We need to talk about the fact that potentially our young people may be susceptible to like relationships with something that is not is a thing, is not a person, right? So let's talk about that. We need to have conversations about AI that extend beyond generative AI and extend beyond one singular product. And I think it's important to keep that in mind as you're navigating this, because this is just what we've seen about AI in the last 18 months, but I don't think it's where we end. And so we need to think about that. We need to keep that in mind. AI is a general purpose technology, not a product.
Yeah, that all makes a lot of sense. The only reason that I was thinking about a demonstration with the one of the bespoke AI in education tools is just the more manicured UI is sometimes a little bit more inviting and intuitive to
Yeah.
teachers who may not understand kind of the prompting approaches or how to really get GPT to output what you want it to output, whereas these make it very easy to do that.
Yeah. Again, I think fundamentally you get to decide this, right? If
Mhm.
you're going to know your teacher community better than I do. If you think that you want to lead with one of those instead of a generalized one, if you want to do a generalized plus that, I think that's fine. I mean, at the end of the day, if you really need to think about what your purpose is for that presentation. What is it by the end of that presentation? What will winning feel like for you? So that's something you need to be very clear-eyed on. And then you should design that to pursue whatever your objective is there in terms of winning. So that being said, I mean, maybe it's even worth sitting there for just a second. If you tomorrow, if your assistant principal, your principal says, "Hey, you got 35 minutes, say what you want to say." What would you try to do? Like, where are you taking everybody towards? What would winning feel like for you?
I think that I would want teachers to walk away. I think right now, the current temperature of the conversation is AI is another supposed miracle technology, just like we saw with adaptive learning 20 years ago or 10 years ago. And just like we've seen with all these different chapters of different ed tech tools. And they think that it's going to be a massive flop. I would want them to walk away kind of seeing how this that technology is different from the other ones, right? Yes, there are highfalutin kind of optimistic. Basically, I would want them to come away thinking, okay, my interest is peaked. This actually could add value to my teaching practice. There are use cases that can help me on a daily basis. I want to explore this more. That's the
Got
plan.
it. So really wanting them to walk out very excited. I think you named it very eloquently in terms of action. Would you want them to do something out? Are you wanting them to walk out of there feeling just like having a good feeling in their stomach? Like that was cool. Like it's a good use of time and hoping that they do it. Or is there like a real next step that you feel like they would need? So because in doing that, you're kind of laying a brick, right? You in an ideal world, they're excited, they have more clarity on it. And so you then want to lay a brick towards like the next thing you need. And remember, our North Star here is two things. It's developing AI literacy across our teaching base or our adult stakeholder base. And it is starting to develop guidelines around a framework. So is there any questions or pieces of those slides that you might be able to bring up and collect input on towards driving towards one of those two metrics?
That's a great question. Something that I definitely would need to think about. Well, did anything come to mind for you in your experience? Because
Yeah.
right now, honestly, nothing really is at the forefront.
Couple things come to mind. Number one, this is, I think, a great place to ask AI. So I would actually recommend, again, you're using AI tools to even ask it, like walk through the scenario and say, based on this, what might you be driving towards? I think sometimes that could spur your thinking. In my experience, if I were doing this and walking through, what I might be then trying to do is to either administer a survey or just by a quick show of hands say, "Hey, I'm really interested in continuing these conversations over the course of the year. I think it's really important that in the spirit of everything we're learning, we create some more concrete guardrails for our school community, as well as I continue to expand the literacy here. Would anybody be interested in staying involved in this and see and just trying to identify my champions, right? Because then what you might be able to do based on that is develop a full task force of 5 or 6 people that want to go on this journey alongside you to have conversations, to plan, to develop a proposal that the entire school community could actually roll out over the course of 12 months. And the nice thing about having a task force is again, it's more credibility. You're getting more folks with different relationships, different positional authority that potentially might be able to support you towards this initiative. You're starting to build your coalition, right? Versus you just trying to do it all by yourself, which is much more difficult when you're talking about getting buy-in in a school community. And so that might be where I drive is saying, okay, the involvement, we will still determine what involvement looks like, but it might mean meeting regularly, maybe once a month, to develop some ideas, to have conversations, and to ultimately determine how we can navigate our school community towards a world powered by AI. And like I said, trying to solicit some, do a temperature check there of who might be interested in that. That might be what I would drive towards. But again, I think there's other alternatives. I don't think that's the only option, but that's the one that comes to mind for me that I might really be pushing for.
I definitely love that idea. Like, I think, yeah, getting together a cohort of similarly minded teachers who are excited to kind of push this and see what it could be for our community. I think that'd be a great to have that little support group and just people to bounce ideas off of and have a dialogue at the very least.
I think that gives you quite a bit to think about. I'm wondering if for our conversation today, is there anything that we didn't hit, anything that you're unclear about that we should spend a little bit of time digging into, or does this feel like quite a bit to bite on? I know we've been talking for a little while here, so I want to just make sure that you feel equipped to go back and work on this.
Mhm.
But
I feel like that, yeah, we've definitely touched on enough to give me a lot of more research and thinking to do. I think I have a lot of points that I want to dive into more and just kind of sit back and think about what would this look like in our community? What would be the best way to approach this? I love the idea of what would a kind of a slide deck there look like. Going to definitely jump into GPT, do some research there, figure out how can I make that the best for these individual teachers and stakeholders to get them to kind of bite the line and see if I can get them engaged and think about this a little more deeply this year.
all right. Just to maybe close out on our conversation, I'd love to just hear from you. What are you taking away from this conversation? Can you kind of give me some of your big takeaways? I'm curious to hear what landed for you.
Certainly. I think that one, when we talk about getting yeses from different people, I think I definitely want to build some sort of flow chart for my own purposes to really see I hadn't really dove into each one of these people, like CTO, head of science, and assistant principal, and put myself in their shoes and thought, why would this matter to them? What would the value proposition be to these individual people? What is their ability to say yes? And what can they do for this AI initiative? I think kind of diving in and really just almost even writing out for each of those people what why they would care and what they can do. It would be helpful. Just making that a little more concrete. I also really like the idea, the kind of two ideas of that you had about getting teachers engaged in for structuring if I did get the opportunity to have a PD session, structuring it in a way where right off the bat, you're getting teachers pulled in by saying, this is what AI can do for you. This is not just another headache that you're going to have to deal with. This is not just another subscription. that's going to sit idle in your teacher computer for the whole school year because it's not really that useful. This is here's a concrete value add for you on a daily basis, and then starting the conversation with that, and then kind of diving into the more complexities and nuances of the technology. I think that would be a really great way to really get teachers excited. And then the last thing, that we just touched on is building the focus group, building a community of teachers that would be willing to kind of test out things in their classroom, have conversations, create dialogue, and just figure out what would work best in our community. And then I think that kind of gives a launching pad, right? I think that's kind of the foundation. And then it's from that foundation, I think it would be easy to dive into building this AI literacy, building this AI framework, right? Actually moving forward on the goals for the school at wide. If that makes sense.
Yeah. I love those takeaways. I'm really excited that a lot of what we discussed resonated for you and you're holding it. If I could offer just like two other quick things as we close out our conversation here. Number one, remember that this is a marathon, not a sprint. So if you're not getting somewhere with certain individuals that you were hoping to, even based on the work we did, don't get discouraged, right? Like you need to be treating this as a marathon. Just because you're a little bit slower on one leg of the race doesn't mean that's going to be that way for the rest of the race, right? You really want to be thinking long term about this. Long term doesn't just mean this school year, right? The second
Mhm,
thing is the the more you're clear on your vision for success, your North Stars, the more you can entertain small, medium, low possibilities for that. And that's going to allow you to win, even if winning is laying a brick and not building the cathedral, right? Like I described. So I think you have done some great work today at really defining what an AI framework means and what that looks like in defining what AI literacy is. But I think the more you can be clear and sharp about what you actually mean when you're talking about those things, and I mean, when I say those things, I mean the who, what, when, where, why, etc. It's just going to help you become even clearer when you're having these conversations with individuals about what you're trying to do, right? So that they know how to support you or where they can't support you, but they can connect you to the person who can, right? So you can spend a lot of, and then also the more you're clear about the most aspirational version of that, then you can see the medium low scenarios that if they say no to the most aspirational, then ask about the medium. Well, we can't do this, but can we do this? Can't do that. Can we do this? So maybe they say no to the capstone, year-long capstone with AI tools. Okay, can I have 60 minutes to do a lesson with students one time during the school year? Once you've asked them for that and they said no, that feels like a much more fair ask, right? So sometimes leading
mhm,
with your North Star, but then being able to
mhm,
scaffold downwards, it gets you closer and they're more likely to say yes after they just said no to three other things, right?
mhm,
The final thing
mhm,
is, man, take care of yourself. So you said you're going to spend 10 to 12 hours this year working on some of this over this. As somebody who also spends a lot of time doing this and recognizing the significance of your role, it's okay if you don't spend every week doing that much time. It's okay if you have setbacks along the way and like you keep working. Just make sure you don't burn yourself out in the process of doing this because a lot of this work, it's not something that needs to be done at the end of this year. It's something that we're going to be ramping towards. So just take care of yourself in this process. So don't put your personal well-being, don't put your self-care, don't put the priorities of your students or those things in front of this. Make sure that those always stay the priorities and that the work we're doing towards this is something that's important and it's significant, but also these things are more important. Your health is more important. Your conversations with your students in science is more important. So just make sure you're taking care of yourself along the way.
Awesome. I really appreciate all that advice. Yeah, and I thank you, Daniel, obviously for taking the time. I think the stuff that you gave me to think about and the direction I have now is much clearer. I feel like I'm like 4 months ahead right now where I was 2 hours ago. So a lot.
I'm happy to hear that. Emmett, thanks you again so much for your time today.
Awesome. Thank you, Daniel. Appreciate it.